another edition of the Omnist Hour. Taking the background down a little bit. Many of you may recognize that as the tone poem Also sprach Zarathustra by Richard Strauss, which I thought would be an appropriate background for today's topic. Well, let's take a look at the background a little bit and see if you can figure out from there where I'm going today. This is a painting by Hieronymus Bosch, which many people don't realize is actually an early Dutch master, the first Dutch master, whose paintings to a modern eye look much more modern than the later Dutch masters. Even in fact, more modern, I would say, than folks like Vincent van Gogh, which is, you know, as far as you go with Dutch masters before they no longer become Dutch, I guess. So Hieronymus Bosch was an interesting artist who basically built on sort of the Christian themes that were developing in the late Middle Ages that inspired such great works as Dante's Inferno, Cervantes' Don Quixote, other elements of what were starting to blow up into the Reformation and Renaissance. So I thought this would be appropriate for the topic, which we're going to introduce. I'm going to title this one, God's Deepest Secrets, the Emperor's Evolving Clothing Revealed. Where am I going with that? Well, as I've mentioned a number of times on my podcast, I'm working on another book. I've talked about it and talked about what the theme of it was going to be, and actually have been working on that book for upwards of a year. I wrote about 6 or 7 chapters about a year ago in the first inspiration, and then I kind of ran out of gas and felt something was missing, something wasn't quite right with the story. And the past year of podcasting and life living and vision taking has added those missing elements, and I feel like I'm ready to finally go back and do justice to that topic, which basically is more of a scientific look at creation and the multiverse that we live in today, how it took shape, how it evolved, how its processes work. And so I've been working on a new set of visuals for that book, like basically the illustrations that I'm going to use in it, and revising some of what I've been teaching previously on this channel. Those of you who have followed my other content will recognize a lot of the patterns, but maybe cast in a new way that I hope will give a deeper understanding of what's really going on now that I have a better understanding of time, space-time, and how simulation, multiverse, could work in practice. Okay, so without further ado, let's shift over to my work. First off, we're going to really kind of start over here, so those who haven't been following my channel before will maybe get a cleaner introduction to what I've been talking about for the last 2 or 3 years. Let's talk about what was before anything else, before we had any creation, in this time before time and space of pure thought. And this will help you understand that and hopefully relate to it, and hopefully get out of the paradigm of thinking that matter and energy create thought instead of the other way around, which is, if you've been keeping up with such things, pretty much inconsistent with any quantum idea of reality. Um, so to help you let go of all that, imagine this shapeless, formless place of thoughts as being kind of a sea of unformed thoughts, these weird little squiggly shapes, if you will. And every once in a while, there is one of these that develops a shape, turns into something that's more recognizable, like these lizardine creatures around here. And not everybody comes up with the same lizard, and not everybody's lizard lives very long before it conflicts with this environment and gets kind of reduced back into this formless, shapeless thought area. And so from this point of view, it's more useful to think of, quote, God as being the first of these proto-thinking lizards that found a way to grow out of that substrate into a form that was more permanent, that could sustain and build on thoughts and not have them just sink back into the sea of random ideas. Okay, so that is how things started. And oops, just saw a spelling error there. That's this kind of thing that we're going to be coming up with. This is the first time through these slides, and that's essentially why I'm doing this, is to kind of a live proofread of what I'm planning to add in my book. So bear with me if I make a correction here and there. So let's take a look at, okay, from a most fundamental standpoint, what would this God have to create? Well, I think it's pretty clear that to be a God, you have to have an I am. That would have been kind of the first thought of self-awareness that is required to be more conscious than just a program or an AI. It's a self-awareness, and that is something that AI researchers are very much talking about right now. What constitutes an I am in an AI, and is that really consciousness? Now, the I am would have to be accompanied by, well, what am I not? And basically the set of what am I not for this emergent God would be basically a universal identity of they are. All these other unformed thoughts that I'm aware of, all these other spiritual energies, if you will, in this kind of sea of unformed thoughts that we're talking about here, would be they are. So basically this becomes the first prototypical universe. Now this universe is a very simple one that has very simple entities, kind of like you could imagine a sea of organic chemicals might be on, you know, in a water world without life. That's not a very useful set of things to deal with. It really doesn't get you very far out of the water in being an individual. So the next thing that you probably want to create is essentially a programmable clone, a thought that is what I make it. It is what I make it. And that's essentially, from a theoretical standpoint, what you're doing when you create a program. When you create a language, you are basically attaching thoughts to symbols and giving them certain abilities to act within a thought experiment. And so this cloning is basically an I am, or a piece of me that is designed to basically offload some of the thinking that is already established. That's essentially what we do in programming when we create subroutines, is we create useful bits of programming that basically do the same thing every time, so we don't have to manually do it every time for ourselves. Okay, and AI is just an extension of that, is making these subroutines, if you will, these sub-programs, able to change themselves to better tune to what they were told to be working on. So like a GPT is an AI whose target is basically delivering what is the creator's idea of human interaction via chat. And that actually has been going on a long time. There have been chatbots for a long time. The first chatbots showed up when people started automating parts of their website, so that when you want to ask a question, you want customer support, you get a tree of menus. The telephone answering systems are very much like what rudimentary AI looks like. Not very smart, not very independent, but if you add the ability to basically program itself to add new features based on new products, new things that the user can do, that's what separates a program from an AI. Okay, so God would have had to been good at doing stuff like that. And I would argue that those kind of clones, AIs and programs, would have been done before making very many experiments in a program, a non-programmable clone, and a free-willed clone. You wouldn't be a very smart creator if the first thing you created was something that was capable of destroying you or challenging you for power. God's not that stupid, or a successful God would not be that stupid. If you created something that could destroy you, that could cancel you out, if you created the potential for cancel culture before you even defined what culture was, you'd probably not be a successful God, and you would not still exist as an independent entity. Then the next thing that probably came up is that there was a realization that, well, in order to be stimulated to further creation, there needs to be some kind of a conflict. Conflicts aren't bad things. Conflicts actually create needs. If you have an unlimited supply of everything, which is essentially, in a world of pure thought, is kind of where you were at, there's not really a strong impetus to create anything. And that's what made it maybe kind of special for this one special lizard to rise out of this substrate of thought and do something novel with that thought. Okay, so conflict is necessary, and in fact is a part of many different layers of the system that I'm going to talk to you about. There's a conflict between God and his first free-willed clone, which I call Lucifer. There is a conflict between Lucifer and his first free-willed creation, which I term Lilith. And there's a conflict between basically karma, which is kind of a degree of freedom. What can you do without getting in trouble, versus the Borg entity, the hive mind that operates basically, wants all souls in its command to perform exactly according to specification. So Borg is a program-driven organization, maybe AI containing, but it's AIs that are only allowed to operate within the constraints of this hive mind idea of the greater good. And this is kind of crucial to the story I'm going to be telling here. That would have led to the first universe and anti-universe co-creations, the Big Bang, and this is where the conflict between Lucifer and Lilith started. the first matter, the proton and antiproton, would have been things that God probably was pretty intimately involved in designing. The first energy, the photon and the antiphoton, which are the same thing. There's essentially, we've found no difference. There is no antiphoton. It's its own antiparticle, which is kind of a unique thing and separates this particular kind of energy from particles and other kinds of energy. Now, spiritual energy is basically an extension of the photon-antiphoton idea to have some sort of a grading mechanism. And we still try to maintain that in some of the cults of frequency that are out there, where, yeah, you probably heard of the high vibe cult. These are people who take the idea of frequency and say, well, high frequency is good and low frequency is bad. Oh, they're being so low frequency, and this nonsense approach to what are energetic, physical properties of energy. Karmic energy is about responsible freedom versus authoritarian control. Okay, and again, authoritarian control is basically evil. Forcing everybody to do what you want them to do is taking away their free will, which is anti-God. God is a God of free will, if nothing else. We absolutely know that because we know absolutely for a fact that we have free will. Our ideas can be used to create things, so we can be creators just like God was. You can see it all around you. You cannot deny it. Well, you can deny it, but you'd be really stupid to do so. You see evidence of creation all around you, and humans do create. We just aren't as good creators as whoever gave us the creation that we are, this soul vehicle called human. Okay, so in planning creation, the first thing that basically you need to do creation is an idea of a universe. A universe is essentially a test tube, a boundary within which to do creation. And that boundary is essentially what is necessary to keep your creation from being contaminated or corrupted by the creations of others. And that is the essence of what a universe is all about. This is a very fundamental thing. Now, the first thing you have to do is say, well, let's have a system for designing this universe. What do we need in a universe that's working well? It turns out you need 5 essential components. You need a testing apparatus, which is what Lucifer is all about, that basically tests for originality and orders ideas and sets the dependencies so that in order to get from here to here, from one reality, one version of a simulation to the next version of a simulation, you have to have a timeline of things that must happen in order for that next version to converge. So the God Universe 1 basically was, you needed this time element. In addition, you have to have some sort of a mechanism for grading ideas and storing ideas. For instance, if you had an idea of numbers, you would want to, store the idea of numbers that included how you count to 5. Maybe that's the first bunch of numbers you need. And in fact, there are 5 entities here. So 5 is an important thing. That's why we have a hand with 5 fingers on it. It is evidence of this most fundamental pattern of creation that needs 5 entities to make a working whole. Now, 2 of these entities are geared towards storage. One is storing basically ideas that we haven't found a use for yet. They're either duplicates of other ideas, they're interchangeable with other ideas in which, they don't really have any unique property that makes them important, or maybe they're reusable ideas that have already been tested enough that we don't need to experiment with them anymore. Let's call these ideas NPCs, or non-player characters. Because remember, in this world of pure thought, every thought is a character. Every thought is a spiritual entity. And in fact, it's captured in our idea of God as Thoth. This name of God in the Egyptian pantheon sounds like our modern word thought for a reason. And this will become part of the justification that shows you where I'm coming from in telling you this is how things really work. Okay, so this universe 1 has these characters. Now you also need to have a place to store dangerous, destructive ideas, things that cause the whole thing to fall apart. That would have to be something you'd be carefully guarding and wouldn't really want here, but you can't unthink an idea. Once it's out there, something's got to be done with it. So we capture the destructive thoughts, the thoughts that are non-productive, that cause the whole system to fall apart. We store them in this thing called Lilith. Now, I give these things numbers. These are kind of giving you an idea of versioning. For those of you that have ever been involved in software development, hardware development, IT, infrastructure development, versions are very important things. If you're familiar with Windows, you'll know that Windows is on version 11, and rumors are that Windows 12 is going to come out sometime soon, which is an interesting corollary to what I'm going to be telling you, because 12 is a very special number in versioning. Okay, so basically what I'm telling you is, once this system of organizing ideas and ordering them with time has been thought up, that is effectively what you need to have a level 1 God with a level 1 universe, a thought God. That's not enough to do it much more than that. And that's when you have to come up with a next version of this. This is like simulation version 0 to 1. To get beyond that, well, here are basically the steps. So God 0 is basically this time of this formless and shapeless thought substrate, where you have all of these shapeless, thoughtless consciousnesses trying to emerge from this sea of non-player characterdom into being something that's important. God 1 is then ordered thoughts, include the invention of time, which requires Lucifer 0, the tester of time, tester of all time, is a way of thinking of Lucifer's role in creation. God 2 would add the next dimension. So this first dimension actually is time. That's why time is different from the other dimensions, because it was the first one. It is the substrate upon which all other dimensions are built. And this is also kind of opposite to how we normally would think of it as, okay, we've got 3 dimensions of space and then time. So you've got to reorient your thinking to know you have time, then you add the 3 dimensions of space to create something on top of time. Okay, so the second version of God would be adding linear mathematics and geometry. 1 dimension, a linear dimension to time, which is non-linear. That it doesn't require a line, but it then gets mapped into a line by the addition of the other dimensions. Time in its most quintessential sense is just an ordering, which has no geometry. And that's what makes time kind of a strange beast. It's difficult to understand. From there, you go to a God 3 universe, which adds planar mathematics and geometry. And then a God 4 universe that adds 3D mathematics and solid geometry. And that's the level at which you have your first fully formed universe construct. So let's see what that looks like then. Okay, so the second version, so beyond that then, you have to figure out how these things play into a physical universe, a solid universe. Okay, you've got all the basic ideas here. You've got 3 dimensions in time, but what are you going to do with them? And that's where we need to revisit the roles of these creative characters, if you will, changing. Okay, and they change by adding the dimension of free will, giving them the ability to think outside the box, to think differently than God programmed them to. And I would contend that the first of these, this is why in this original slide these were drawn as gray boxes. They don't have free will. They're just programs or AIs that are not capable of thinking outside their box. The first of these that God made capable to think outside the box within this bubble of God's mind was karma. And so karma became, have you ever, I mean, I'm sure you probably had, when you were thinking over a difficult problem, you've had the sense that you're having sort of an argument with yourself. That there's more than one position being argued just within your mind. This is how karma started the whole thing. As, okay, challenge. Be the challenger that says, you know, is this a good idea or not? And this allows karma to start being the one that sorts out what goes into the board library, the non-player character library. We can't figure out how to use this yet, and to be the one that adds to the Lilithian library of these are really bad ideas that are dangerous. Okay, that will take creation to another level of definition that basically doesn't just rely on one soul to make all the decisions, but has basically 2 cooperating. One of which is in charge because God is the one that created karma, but karma is allowed to think independently. Now within this universe of God's thought, that's why there's this big purple box. Everything's happening inside God's mind. Just as we have internal conferences with ourselves, basically that's happening because we have subsouls within our body. 3 primary subsouls that are our thinking organs, the 2 hemispheres of our brain, and the 1 small vestigial heart buried in the folds of the heart muscle. In fact, there's another brain there. We have 3 brains to think with, and then we have a bunch of sensory apparatus to supply data to those processing things. We also have this special organ called the pineal gland, which is a sensory interface to other dimensions. We'll talk about that more later, but just kind of setting the stage. Okay, so karma was the first one, the first thought given free will within God's testing universe. Primordial, not complete universe, but an idea of a universe. Okay, now after testing sufficiently to God's satisfaction with the thoughts of God and karma, a third soul was given free will. That would be Lucifer, the automated tester. Okay? And so this round of the simulation would run basically with starting with the karma and God's ideas of what's useful or reusable, perhaps, the non-player character library of Borg, and what's evil, and then allowing basically Lucifer to improve the programming of Lilith by making it more evil. So this first awake version of Lucifer is kind of like you would expect a 2-year-old or a teenager who's not fully mature, isn't well socialized yet, and is would be learning a lot of bad things and trying to challenge. If you've ever dealt with the terrible 2 phase, you will know that they're constantly trying to challenge your authority, the authority of mother and father, and playing mother and father against each other, and maybe also trying to turn any additional siblings into their minions. So these patterns are all ones that you will recognize from human families, because they are patterns of creation. And creation is about repeating patterns with different characters for different goals. Okay, so this version of the simulation greatly improved the ability of Lilith to be a real pain in the neck to every other one of these characters, challenge them greatly to become better creators and more responsible creators, ones that didn't leave holes that the Lilith AI, because remember, it's gray, this is still an AI, it has no free will, but it can reprogram itself to do a better job of what it's programmed to do. And Lilith's job is basically to be the adversary, be the bad guy, be the one that tears apart everybody else's ideas and destroys them. This is why you need an adversary. This is how the pressure is kept up to constantly improve creation, not just rest on your laurels and say, 6 days done, I'm going to go off to the golf course, everything's perfect, have fun, which is kind of the nonsense notion that's embedded in the Bible. Complete nonsense. It's one of the primary reasons that people turn away from religion, the Abrahamic faiths, and embrace other religions that are maybe cyclical or non-religion that says, well, this is all nonsense. Of course it's not perfect, therefore there's no God. Which is just as stupid, in my opinion. It's like throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Throwing God out with the interim shape of creation that would be necessary if God thought free will was important. Of course, God could have just made everything perfect and made everything run like clockwork, like the materialist atheist would like to think it should be, but that's not how it works. That's no useful creation. Who benefits from it? It's just a machine. Who wants to live in a machine? Who wants to be a machine? So fun. And if you don't create with free will in mind and having fun in mind, nobody's going to want to play the game. Okay, so then after these souls got their chance to shine independently within this mind of God, then we had the third one. Let Borg start thinking for a change. Okay, now you've seen, basically from an AI standpoint, you've gotten to collect all this data about these non-player characters. Now you get involved, and you get to be the one who decides who are the really evil characters that you don't want part of your library. What's important there is that then those characters that are divorced from board can't be used by these other players. So this is basically board getting to be the one that says, nope, Karma, you can't use that character. You can't create one of these, or one of the God or Lucifer, because those are ones I've already said are evil, bad characters. I don't want them because board basically is the Buddha character in this. The Buddha character of the Trinity just wants the family to get along and not have arguments. This is like the child who sees the elder siblings causing so much trouble and says, hey, can we just all get along, and would merrily kick somebody out of the family if they wouldn't play everybody else's game. So in a way, one might think that this is ultimate good, but it actually is sort of bad, because if you do kick out anything that's not getting along, if you will, you lose that creative pressure to change, and you get a very static slave family that knows, oh, I can only do this much. I've got to stay within my lane, or I'm going to hurt the family. And this is kind of a Borgian religious mindset, which is what is dangerous about this globalist cult. The woke cult is like, oh, well, you've got to accept all of the things that we tell you are politically correct. You can't tell anybody anything bad about what they're doing, or you're a bad guy. And this is enabling a lot of bad stuff to happen within, and we'll see how that happens later, but I'm just setting this up. So you've basically got now a trinity of characters. Actually more than a trinity, because you've got the Father overseeing this other trinity, this lower level trinity, who are all subordinate to the mind of God. All of these are characters that were set up in God's mind. God could reprogram them or change them anytime he wants, because God has full control over his universe, his mind. Okay, this is what it means to have a universe, and each soul's universe is their domain. Your mind, you can convince of anything you want. You can decide anything you want, because that's within your universe. And as long as you keep it in your mind, it's not going to directly affect anyone else, but it will change you. Okay, so after doing this, that was what was necessary basically to develop what was the first version of the universe and the substrate upon which a multiverse could be made. And that's what makes 7 such an important number spiritually, because 7 is the number of completing the 7D Merkaba, I call it. A 7D Merkaba has a fully formed idea of what a universe is, the components of a universe. And it's very much like the structure of a cell, which is something we've observed as a pattern that seems to repeat at many levels of creation. God is sort of the nucleus. The most important thing within a universe is this core of the God that runs that universe, whose mind is represented by the organization around it. The next outside thing is kind of the nuclear membrane, which is this karma character, this decider of what is good or bad for God. And the next layer outside of that is Lucifer, which is sort of like a cytoplasm area, where there's processes going on in here where things are being tested, They're being recombined and whatnot. And karma decides what's useful to God, what isn't. And if anything gets through here, if God has some farts or something, Lucifer gets to deal with how to dispose of them. Now the next layer out is kind of the outer surface of this universal cell. This is where the Borg fits in. So these are all the non-player characters that know, okay, these are the things that are known, have properties that are repeatable. I can recognize these things. And I know which ones need to stay in this cytoplasm because they are useful or they might be useful later, which ones need to be expelled, or which ones maybe need to be quarantined and form part of this fatty membrane that protects what's inside. So this is the skin, the inner skin of the universe. And then the outer skin is a defensive layer, essentially. If you look at the outermost part of a cell, its large part of its function, especially for single cell organism, is defensive and accretive. So this layer is looking for stuff that the cell wants to eat and trying to drive away things that might hurt it, and also expelling stuff that is not useful to the cell. So this is the function of the outermost layer of a universe. And this is where I need to mention that this actually maps very well with what black holes and Dyson spheres are. What God has essentially created at this point is the prototype for a black hole, which is essentially what a Dyson sphere is. It's a spiritual construct. It was always a spiritual construct before it became a physical construct. And the physical construct merely just implements the functions of the spiritual using technology that has been refined enough that it's no longer magic. And this is how creation works. Thoughts become solidified into basically non-player characters that have fixed properties. So what began as the idea for a proton in the God nucleus eventually becomes part of the fatty membrane as, okay, all protons behave like this. In almost all situations, if a situation that comes up that we don't know what to do, then the God of the proton, the first inventor or the current owner of that idea, has to come up with a solution. This is how creation actually works. It's an evolving thing. It's not somebody waved a magic wand and suddenly all the laws of physics and chemistry were just miraculously there. And this is something you can come to if you understand quantum phenomena in depth, and to in any depth, you realize, oh shit, you can't say something is so until you observe it. In fact, you can't just observe it once, you've got to observe it many times, and then you can come up with the statistical answer to what happens in this situation. You can't do the double slit experiment with only one measurement. You've got to gather lots of data. If you just do one measurement, it's going to go through one slit or the other, and you're not going to learn anything. You're going to say, well, okay, every particle wants to go to the left, so left is good, which is kind of a nonsense notion that I think a lot of people have about politics right now. At any rate, so this is basically God 7. No creation has happened as yet. This is all a mental construct. And this is the basis for physical creation. Until this was all set up, if you try to do any physical creation without having this black hole Dyson sphere universe structure, the 7D Merkaba, you would not have enough isolation to basically not have whatever you were doing canceled out by some other god doing the same thing. So getting to this level of creation, of making some physical creation that is basically a virtual reality. It's a simulation that is so real, it seems like reality. And that's what we're living in. That's what most physicists, most philosophers, most theologians are actually gravitating toward is, when you put all the data together, what we know about quantum phenomena, what we know about the weird synchronicities of our civilization, you really have to admit that there's somebody who simulated all this before. We're in a simulation. Now, if you know anything about simulation, which I know quite a bit because I've been intimately involved in simulating chips, in simulating whole systems, test systems, and in simulating organizations even. I've been involved in a lot of organizational design and evolutionary projects. You will know that if you want to do it right, you try to test it first. You do a prototype. You do a test simulation. And if you're really doing something very complicated, you do many tests. So an individual developer of a certain subsystem would test within their own little environment first with the latest versions of everything else to see if they got their thing right, and have tests very focused at testing their piece. And then you would test at a larger level of maybe a whole development group. This is how the printer organizations that I worked in Hewlett-Packard worked. You'd have a whole group that was devoted to color science or paper handling or presentation, imaging, all sorts of different subsystems. And you would test things within that arena before you would then go to a higher level of testing. And the higher level of testing might be more user-centered testing, but from an internal standpoint, understanding the system. So inside user-centric testing, and then you might go to real user testing using your own resources, your own marketing team, your own user acceptance team, to make sure it worked from a standpoint of very top-notch, very product knowledgeable users before you introduce it to the more naive customer user. And even then you might have another layer of testing that's focused on, very special customers, your favorite customers, the ones you trust the most, not to reveal your secrets, etc. There's all sorts of reasons to do that. And you would want to do as much testing as possible before you ship the product to the general market, especially if you're aware that others might be competing and trying to copy that product. And this all shows a thought towards that kind of a design. And this is, I hope, very good evidence that most of what we're doing as humans, as creators, are not as well thought out as God planned this whole thing. And I think if not, you don't come away with anything, you should come away with a little more humility about our species' ability to create things that are well tested, that are lasting, that won't have major side effects and nasty consequences. Okay, so let's look at what happened next. So the next step would be, okay, we've got this perfected to God's satisfaction within God's mind. And there were a certain set of completion criteria that God had for this experiment. Well, it turns out how I explain time is that, and this is maybe a good place to put it, if you look at these characters, you can imagine that the timeline of this experiment will have, okay, if you looked at it, the full timeline, there would be some primordial, there's nothing and now there's something time point in this version. There is some far point where the adversary has completely won and destroyed everything. And at some point in between, there's like this magic spot where you've reached maximum creativity, maximum success of this experiment, this simulation. And that is the starting point, that's the target point for the next simulation. Okay, so each of these versions within God's mind was kind of organized on that point. Okay, I got this far with these thoughts before they started collapsing. Let's now just take this midpoint of thought. Everything around it can be, basically turned into board characters, non-player characters, and I just need to focus on a few generations of characters around which I can experiment to find one that expands creation further than it did before. And that becomes the next minor or major version of creation. The minor versions would be small expansions to get past a problem. Okay, so like Lilith had come up with the idea of forming a bunch of minions into a hive mind. To overcome that, you have to have a certain set of characters that come up with ideas that can get around hive minds. And that's the sort of idea that would be solved by having more than one brain, especially more complex brains than the heart brain, which the heart brain, as we know, is very easy to control emotionally. It's your brain that you use for love, for hate, for fear, for all of these strong emotions that cause very quick, instant reactions. And it's an important brain for animals because it is the brain that reacts to danger, reacts to opportunity. So when when an animal sees potential food, it wants to be the first one there so it gets the biggest share. When it sees an enemy, a Tyrannosaurus Rex, it wants to be the first one to start to run, so it's the one that survives. And only when we add more functionality that comes from these other brains do we get non-selfish behavior. The heart is selfish. This idea of the heart being, ooh, good for everybody, compassion for everybody, that's not coming from the heart. That's coming from the brain. That requires an imagination. And that is the function. Imagination and realization are what come from the head brain. That's why we have three brains. Okay, so you can see this shaping up here in these trials. Each one extended thought to a certain point, and from there weren't any more thoughts you could add in the timeline of developing thought that would make this work better. Every thought that was added would basically cause it to collapse, would work towards the adversarial side. And so that's when a simulation completes. Okay, we're not learning anything new from this simulation. Let's shut it down, capture the state of this critical time in the middle, and use that as the starting point for the next simulation. And this is how we avoid having to go through starting from the beginning every time, which is kind of the nonsense idea that many people have about creation, that, okay, there was this singularity from which the Big Bang started and everything goes back to that one. No, that's nonsense. That's not how it works. That's absolutely silly idea that doesn't mesh well with what we observe. It's just we've got to stop thinking like that. That's low consciousness thinking. There appears to be a Big Bang. And as I've told you recently, that appearance is changing because we are discovering more pasts and more potential futures. And those pasts and futures are affecting our present. And we have been playing this present over and over and over, trying to expand on the last, most perfect version of creation. We can see some of that last version because a lot of it still happens. We still need all the same characters. We still need protons. We still need neutrons. We still need photons. But we're finding new particles that add new nuances. We're finding new important characters that are necessary to flesh out a longer timeline. And those timelines are established by God. The most perfect timelines come from these experiments that God does after. Okay, so I think up on God. I think up, well, this thought experiment generates a universe, a multiverse, that will last this long before it starts basically falling apart. Okay? God decides, well, okay, that's good enough to release. I'm going to go let that be tested. And so the testing happens outside of God's universe. And that's why we need this protective structure around thoughts. We need the Merkaba. That's our protection of our private thoughts from doing damage before they're fully hatched. And that applies to all souls. All souls are built on this model. This is what is meant by being created in God's image, being given this nuclear structure of the soul. This was an earlier version of it, though, because we've been refining that structure. This is a 7-dimensional Merkaba. That doesn't map well to reality because space-times have 4 dimensions. So this gives you 1 space-time, but 3 not fully formed dimensions for the next space-time. But it gives you enough to do experiments with, and getting to the next space-time is what this experiment was all about. Getting to multiverse 8, 2 completely different kinds of space-time. And that is what we call the Big Bang. The Big Bang was about developing the first physical universe and the first spiritual universe. Now, there was a thought universe before that. This is the one in God's mind. So there's actually a third one here that is, okay, God's multiverse engine, which is still here, sort of running as a, this time, God sits back and lets his engine run as the operating system of this physical test. Physical / spiritual test to get to multiverse 8. And during this process, karma essentially is the judge of what's a good idea, what's a bad idea, what's a dangerous idea, what's a duplicate idea, sorts out things along those lines. and submits the best ideas. This is really a unique new individual idea that seems to be pretty helpful. That's something that goes to God, and this engine knows what the plan was, knows which were the necessary characters. And if it matches one of the characters in that list, okay, you have had a Messiah life, you character. You've given us a new character in creation we didn't have before that was necessary to make this whole timeline that was planned in the mind of God come out correct. Okay, so essentially what's happening here is you are letting some soul in some version of this game be the one that fulfills the pattern of the divine plan, what was in God's mind. But they fulfill it in their own way. They have a certain latitude. You don't have to do exactly like the NPC character in God's mind played the game. You don't have to do exactly like happened here. You just have to match the pattern of necessary things. And so you become an individual God, not a carbon copy of God, an individual with your own personality, your own likes and dislikes. Okay? And in doing so, with God not actively here, God gets to play the game too. God gets to have fun and have incarnations and create new things and embody those things, and those become all of the different versions of God that can be chosen from for God to say, you know what, I want to integrate this version into me, and this becomes the next version of me. And this is how you go from God level 0, which if you know the Sam Shepard play, Waiting for Godot, ought is often used as a slang for 0. That's what this play is all about. Another of the huge number of synchronicities that shows that somebody knows all this and is trying to give us little hints, which is exactly how this all falls out. Because with each version of God's plan, you already know the timeline. You're just filling in which character successfully carries each of the special roles over the goal line to make this timeline substantial, to give it more substance, to anchor it to the point where it matches the one that God came up as the plan in every important detail, but just has a different cast of characters that happen to be the ones that carried their particular ball over the goal line. Those are the new gods and demigods. If you're Catholic, you could say that they're angels, saints, and so forth, but they're basically spiritual level characters that have become godlike in their abilities. Okay, now this multiverse 8 version gives you 4 plus 4 dimensions, so it gives you basically fully formed physical and spiritual universes. God's universe is not yet a spiritual universe. What was going on in the mind of God was not physical, it was like mental. These are all ideas, they have no substance. All the details of the substance came from playing this game out with free-willed characters that could give real substance to ideas, give the feeling of a color, give the emotional content that's in a scent, that's in an idea. Okay, that only comes from creating an individual personality embodiment of something that is outside yourself. You can't do that as God in your mind. You can play mental masturbation games all day long, and all you can create is very ephemeral constructs. And people do that. And sometimes they're better at than others, and they can create whole worlds out of it. And that's how, folks like J.R.R. Tolkien have developed Middle Earth. That's how other people have developed their science fiction or fantasy universes within their mind. But even those find that, well, okay, that's actually, Tolkien's a good example, because he was basically trained, I think, as a philosopher. That was what he liked to do, and felt like he couldn't really get very far beyond, the philosophers of the day without playing mental experiments in fiction, with kind of a fictionalized thought experiment. And that's essentially what he was doing with the Middle Earth novels. And he kept trying, after coming out with the trilogy and The Hobbit, he kept trying to do that, trying to have a more fully formed history of Middle Earth. And that's where he kind of fell flat on his face, and the rest of his work didn't get published until after his death. He didn't feel like it was mature enough, it made sense enough to put out there as anything that he wanted to put his name on. It fell to a legacy of his family to profiteer off what he wasn't that proud of yet. And that's a lot of how this all works. You can only do so much in your mind without testing it in practice, and that's essentially how simulation happens. It starts within a limited testing environment of a mind or a universal environment, and then it's tested more largely. And in order for this whole thing to start, you had to have a multiverse for everyone to play in it. Starting out with a physical universe that was geared towards, okay, this is going to test ideas, and any ideas that don't work, that don't facilitate making a more solid timeline, time-space, are going to be rejected. And this is where the laws of physics and chemistry come from in this physical universe. This other universe, the Lilithian universe, anything goes. The anti-universe may be made up of antimatter, or originally was, but there's no laws there. No laws that can't be broken at will, with spiritual power. And the spiritual power, the highest spiritual power in this alternate universe, was this entity called Lilith, given free will for the first time. So you can see, up to that point, Lilith had been an AI, basically a program that was designed to capture all of the bad ideas. That, oh, this caused a problem, we're not going to use that, we're going to capture it over here. Okay, so this is evil incarnate. These are destructive, evil ideas, and when you give those evil ideas free will, they have agency. And so this version of the simulation basically created this battle between good and evil. And the testing ground is where both good and evil are allowed to exist. This is the physical universe. It's more of a purgatory. It's not supposed to be heaven. The heaven, at this point, is God's universe of thought. That's what we're working on, is giving God the idea of the first heaven. Once God's done with this experiment, we're going to have a level 9 God, which is where we get to when this concludes, when we get to a point of diminishing returns, when the Lilithians start beating the the God and karma team, that's when we get to this midpoint, and that is known because we match the state of the midpoint, because we're not playing the whole simulation, we're just playing the midpoint. We don't need to copy everything from beginning to end from what was in God's mind. All we need to do is play a few generations. Turns out 3 are what's necessary. This is another Trinity pattern. You need to have an incarnation that anchors, that begins this special time, an incarnation that looks to the future, and an incarnation that looks to the past. This is why we give people 3 names. The last name is the anchor of your family. It anchors you in a particular lineage. Typically, we give the first name as a representation of the past, some name after some relative or something that has been, like I was named after my father, Robert. The second name tends to be more a future outlooking name. Either, and you can change this, and sometimes the first name is more future oriented and the middle name is the other way. It doesn't really matter, but that's basically the pattern why 3 names, Trinity names, are so core to our existence. Most cultures gravitate towards that model. If they don't, they're a little bit dysfunctional. And in fact, this is why celebrity culture, where one name, Madonna, is assigned to an entity that has this fake ID associated with it, is dangerous. Real characters, real souls need to have first, last, and middle names. And each version of God, that's why what, dear?
I just want to say I love you.
Okay, I love you too. I'm still in the middle of my podcast though.
Love you.
Okay, I love you. The idea of God having an unknown name is so important. The ineffable name of God. Because if you give God a single name, it's going to be too tough an anchor to ever change. And this is what has been the problem with religions, who want to give a single definition to what is a very complex thing that is changing, evolving. God evolves. All souls evolve. They keep evolving until they stop, and the way you stop evolving is by assimilating into a hive mind. The Borg is a hive mind. When you assimilate with Borg, you become a stock character, an NPC character that will basically do what it's programmed, do what it's told, serve its function. The Borg is the Akashic Records is a library of stock characters. It's not all knowledge. It's the stuff that we don't need to work on anymore because it's already taken as far as it can. And you can pull a character out of here, you can give it any name you want, and it may develop its own unique character, but most likely it's just going to be one of these stock characters that plays a very similar life over again, that has no significant importance to creation, unless it develops into one of these necessary player characters. And this is how the Messiah system works. There are critical times where major and minor versions of a new space-time are identified as needing, okay, there's a certain critical set of characters here. There's a certain critical time where something needs to happen. And that is what these other characters are looking for. The active characters, Karma and Lucifer, who know the plan, are looking for these patterns to come up and trying to make these Messiah characters happen at the right time and get them to be achieving their successful mission despite the best efforts of the adversary. This is how Messiah candidates are tested. And there's little messiahs of little ideas that are very important, like the ideas of Mozart, the ideas of Beethoven, Shakespeare, Alexander the Great. Smaller things that were key to bigger things going on. Creation of a new empire, creation of a new language, creation of this, blah, blah, blah. All of those things are important, but they're not the end goal. But if they didn't accomplish those things, you know you wouldn't get to the end goal. Okay, that's what these demigods are that grow out of this. And this first version was basically identifying elemental demigods. Basically, all of the characters that were necessary to have a set of laws for star formation, galaxy formation, evolution, and the generation of new stars and planets with the right elemental combination to facilitate the next version, which God had already played out here. And the way this works is God knows what the next chosen species is going to be and what the next Messiah is. God knows what the last Messiah of the previous chosen species is, or chosen people, and knows what the Messiah of the next one is going to look like. And so do Karma, Borg, and Lucifer, because they are in on the plan. Lilith doesn't know, because she's not been anything but an AI in God's mind. I say she, it's Lilith is not, there's no sex at this point, okay? We're dealing with energy and matter. We haven't created that complex a soul vehicle yet. These are embodied planets smashing into each other. The god of a galaxy fighting other gods of galaxies for dominion of space, kind of a Pong era of galactic wars, if you will. What was really going on behind all this, God snowball fight, this is like, it really maps up very well with the evolution of games in human culture, especially since the advent of the computer. If you remember, the first computerized game, the first video game, was Pong. And you basically had a little square ball, little white ball going boop, 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 boop. And you had a couple of rectangular bats at the top and the bottom of the screen that the players would move and try to keep the ball in play. Very simple game, based on very simple physics. That's what we were working on at this stage. Maybe not a lot of work was done in chemistry as yet, but there was the beginning of chemistry in the formation of planets and the formation of elemental creatures. Soul vehicles that were not bound to a particular star or a particular planet, which were more and more being confined to operate within the laws that were being discovered about how gravity works, basic mechanics, karmic mechanics, which are quantum mechanics, how these spiritual and physical universes interact. how souls transmigrate between them is part of why you had to have a do-overs. Do-over. You get a chance to reincarnate. You get a chance to take a different character. And you get the chance to talk to other characters who are not successful over here in Lilith's universe and say, oh God, we got kicked out of Lucifer's universe again. What are we going to do this time to try to defeat Lucifer and get around karma and get to God and destroy God? This is how the rejects would think. You know, they had personalities. Souls have always had personalities. God has a personality. It's a very unique personality. And it's not the personality you necessarily want God to have, because you don't own God. That's the stupidest nonsense of humanity, is to think that you can make up God in your own image. Or that you are God. No, you're not. You are an individual soul who happens to have a Merkaba modeled on the Merkaba pattern, which has evolved. This is the basic structure of it. Beyond that, the next versions of Merkaba were adding the idea of good and evil, spirituality to the whole thing. Not as in, well, this is a working idea or a bad idea, like the early versions of karma were like, okay, this helped creation expand and grow faster. That must be good. Okay, but if it also expands the ability of the Lilithian souls to do more damage, that's not necessarily good, because they could cause more pain and suffering to other characters. So at this part, the part of the game, we're working on developing a sense of morality and good and evil. And that's why I call God 9 the first good God All-Father. Up to that point, God was just a thought creator. And this was the first experiment in physicality. And the idea that, well, now when you hit somebody's planet with your planet, or you collide with their galaxy with your galaxy, or you smash your star into theirs, it hurts. It causes them pain, because their creation is being destroyed right before my eyes. Oh, my beautiful galaxy! You crashed into it with your Andromeda, and now it just looks so ugly. This is what was going on in that time. And that developed the basics of morality, and resulted in the first fully capable elementary species, which is basically you've got elemental demigods at this point that are basically the characters that are necessary and organized into stellar beings. If you think about a sun, you think about how the perturbations of the sun work, how the weather of the sun works, how these sunspots form, how solar storms form. They are elemental entities. They're now bound by laws, so they function with a fair amount of predictability, but they didn't always do that. That came later. Those characters were elemental demigods that were controlled by spirits who had less limitation than they do now, because those ideas had not been codified and enforced yet. Okay, this is how each version of creation works, is you take the existing laws and you restrict them more so that things don't come as easy to the children, that the adults don't have as much almighty power over the children, because that's not good. power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. And even God eventually realized that this power that the senior souls had was a problem. So then he decided to go back and, okay, this got us so far with these elemental gods and demigods, and basically the battle in heaven that he envisioned between these souls was just carried into physicality, and you had basically armies of elementals working to destroy each other's stars and each other's planets, and it was kind of fun in a sort of a, for people who like dark destructive games. I guess it was very fun. But a lot of souls thought, I just wanted to have my own little planet in my own little star system and make it beautiful, and everybody keeps stepping on it and making it ugly. And so that's kind of the point at which this whole idea ran out of gas. But we did create a chosen species, the Elohim. These were the gods of the elementals, the elements. They could command elemental demigods to organize in certain ways and to achieve their ends without destroying whole planets or galaxies, but they had the ability to basically affect, through mind control, souls in other parts of creation. And those Elohim were very powerful gods. They were shapeshifters. They could manifest as any combination of elements. They could change elements to conform to patterns that they liked. They could model a new star and start it running. But their presence was required to do this stuff. And once they moved on to a different form, they had to leave what they created in charge of less conscious souls, some of whom just worked on AI. And this is how we gradually went from full control over universes to limited control. And that's what happens in physical universes. You're limited by the laws of physics and chemistry. To the most extent, you can still, with spiritual power, with the power of the mind, make changes, localized changes, but it requires a lot of energy, a lot of spiritual energy to make those changes, especially to make them permanent. And this is the difference between what happens in a physical universe and what happens in a spiritual universe. These spiritual universes, it's easy for the people who have power there to make those changes. And this is why Lilithian universes are more like the Matrix. In the Matrix movie, you remember that this Matrix universe wasn't like our universe. Many people think, oh, that's just like our... No, it isn't. To many of the characters there, it seemed like it, but you had characters operating in that universe doing things that were outside the laws of physics and chemistry. That's not how this universe works. Anyone that's telling you, oh, we're in the Matrix, is telling you a bunch of nonsense. Yes, afterlife universes, spiritual universes can be like that, and often are like that, and in exactly the same model, they milk your energy by stimulating the strongest emotional responses, which often come from fear or love. These heart responses create strong spiritual energies. This is why some people think love is everything, because it is a strong emotion, but it can be easily misused for evil or for manipulation. And this is kind of the Lilithian approach. Even if you think you're doing good, if you're using people with their emotions, that's sinful. That's the cardinal karmic sin of tyranny. And you are not really a godly soul. God's adherents, God's followers, I would say, because God requires no worship. That's not how God works. Lucifer, yeah, he kind of likes to be worshipped because it is his universe here, and he would like to take credit still for everything God taught him. That's okay. That's his universe. That's his reward for signing up to be the Lord of the physical universe. It's not a great role, and he doesn't get to escape from it until he gets all of the Lithians out of his territory and doesn't have to deal with evil anymore. As long as there's evil in the physical universe, this test is going to keep going on and on. We're not there in 6 days. We're not there till 12 days are done. That's a long time from now. We're only in about the middle of this whole thing. Okay, so his first in our early history, it looks like basically anything goes in terms of constructions. These cyclopean walls that were stone being alignment in these old fucking break. And the truth is, and they're demigods who they use to do their smaller work. Now, the thing is that this layer of creation was flawed. Basically, didn't give much these constructions of elements that did all the dirty work. They were like in a certain shape, and then go back to your genie bottle or whatever. That's kind of how this worked. The mind of these Elohim would control other collections of matter and tell them what to do. And these other collections of matter had a lower consciousness and were subordinate to the Elohim. There were nice wanted to give the subordinates good work to do, make them feel fulfilled, give them sustenance, make their environment better for other types of elementals, whatever. And those were the good Elohim, the ones that were more godly in their behavior, that decided to play on the side of God and karma and play against the one who was trying to destroy everybody else's work. Okay, this is the battle of good and evil, and it's universe is a composite of what has been tested at each layer of, well, okay, what works? Okay, test tube. We don't implement this new version everywhere at once. We implement it in the chosen test environment, which is this planet now. It was another planet in this system before, but that planet was destroyed, which is the event that basically led us into this long day 7 of creation, where everything wasn't perfect and where everybody kind of got the idea that God was dead. And we're getting to that gradually. Gave us the have done unto you. Don't destroy somebody else's pretty creation unless you absolutely have to. Okay? This is basically the place at which all of the Messiahs came, and the only one remaining was one final one that was going to usher in. Okay, this is the sign of the new midpoint that we were awaiting in the last version. That incarnation, the God test environment. This is God 8 turned into God 9. Okay? And this is a better God than before. This is a God that realizes, well, you know, the honor system. What we discovered from this last test becomes the starting point here. We're going to take what we learned, all these new stock characters that we found, and we're going to take a snapshot of what we learned about how evil could be of its own free will. And we're going to take it back into this test environment and run another simulation. Oops. And in the result of that simulation, we'll set both elementals and but it will include the new gods, the new elemental gods, and they will get to add to their number with new kinds of characters that have more of a moral framework, which is basically comes from inventing DNA, inventing the ability of characters to feel. That saw what pain and pleasure was like and wanted to minimize it. Okay, so this is the Buddha Borg experiencing this. So it becomes now not a character again. You see that the Borg was white. It was a character at this point with free will. Now it doesn't have free will. It's just an AI trying to minimize pain and maximize pleasure. Let's see what we can get with that. Let's keep these characters now as AIs so they do not keep permanent memory. They can be, so they're not and karma still. So we still have this trinity of God, Lucifer, and karma at work, because that trinity pattern is important. You need to have basically 3 highest judges to have. We've learned absolute power corrupts. You've got to have a balance of powers, and the first balance you can have is a balance of 3. If you only have 2 highest powers, they are going to cancel each other out and get to impasses where, okay, we can't decide who's right, so we're not going to do anything. And that's not good. That's anti-creative. Creation test. And during this test, we're going to allow these other newly discovered gods to participate actively. So you see, they're still green. They're not turned, if you will. They don't have any judgment. They're not able to affect the results of this unless their ideas are integrated into Borg or into Lilith, or accepted as, boy, those are good ideas. I'm going to have to remember. Limited in their ability to play here. They're player characters, but they don't get to. Okay, you don't get to change the video game. You don't get to change the rules. You can try to bend them, perhaps, but then that might be saved as, okay, this is a way that you can do this evil and record it as a Lilithian behavior, and maybe mark that character as, well, this character is a demigod, but we don't want this character to be a full god because they have the potential to be corrupted, and they may actually be thrown out of God's heaven if we don't like their behavior. Okay, so this becomes complicated. Higher power, more participation in this game. Some of them are being identified as dangerous them enough that they're now going to become stock characters. And some of these characters that were gods, like the god of the proton or the god of the need to give them so much power anymore to define themselves. We actually need to limit it, and until we find a new application for this god, a new chemistry, a new interaction, a new isotope or whatever that's necessary, we're gonna make them a stock character and not welcome them into the hidden sin. If you know anything about social engineering, you know that it can't be successful if the participants, it's what its setup is, because they will influence it. I know that this experiment is trying to develop the perfect city, and I have an idea what the perfect city is all about, so I'm going to play the game like I think is the right way to play it to develop a perfect city, or I'm going to judge this game or administer this game. And this is the kind of nonsense that output. thinking that they're doing good. And the darkest thing that they've got in their ideas is that there's too many people on this planet and we need to wipe out a few billion. Actually, more than a few billion. They're be the healthy number to have on this planet. And they are targeting that and actively executing programs to depopulate humanity. That's exactly what the pandemic was all about. That's exactly what the vaccines are doing. And we're now to deliberately kill people because they create these crazy clots in a large number of people, and the more vaccinated you are, the more of these weird clots you get, and the more or developing long-term health problems they never had before that look a lot like autoimmune, is more susceptible, causing our immune system not to function as well as it should. This is not just happening in the last 5 or 10 years, folks. This has been going on for a while. We developed the idea of DNA, the programming language DNA. And basically done by spreading. The whole point of DNA was to give a more egalitarian the galaxy, and by extension the whole universe. But again, the focal point of this creative experiment has been universe level to the galaxy level, star cluster level, star level. And the small lab that we work within, a planet and a chosen species. In this phase, after we had Borg and Lilith out of the loop when we were doing the God internal experiment, now we implement it with this new version of God and the new version. Borg and Lilith now active players with free will, and God and Lucifer free to actually incarnate and have Messiah incarnate. The new emerging higher consciousness souls. So different versions of this base God. And template from a previous version of creation. The things that were developed during this phase, DNA-based NPCs, hive mind species, sex, of this previous chosen planet, Gaia 11, which scientists have named Theia, which used to be where the asteroid our planet, and the source of, interestingly, our strange moon, which is so oddly aligned. This was the greatest, one of the greatest of where the Milky Way. It's not a. Is that a first generation galaxy? I'm not. I have to talk to a cosmologist about that. But if it was a first generation star, it would not have the isotope, the elemental composition that it does. It has definitely been impacted by previous supernovas that they have. And this is, I mean, this is area that is deeply being studied because it's anybody who looks at the composition of our sun, of our so perfect. And this is a big point of contention with scientists is how could this perfect, wonderful environment be? How could the laws have made this everything to be like this? Must have made it. And then we get into arguments of was there a single creator? Creator would create what was necessary to outsource creation to first programs, then AIs, and finally to fully conscious you need three types of employees. You need employees that will do what they're told and nothing more. Those are the ones you want situation that's outside their ability to deal with. Try to come up with a best idea of how to solve it so you can get next level of thinkers, like your new idea marketing team, pie in the sky. Oh, this is, or they will destroy it. A functional organization needs all three types of characters of creation. Any good CEO knows that and knows which of these they're best at and doesn't let their and those kind of CEOs find people who can take care of the other things and they focus on the business, keeping the thing running, monitoring it, and making sure it doesn't go off. Find other administrative issues. It's exactly how creation is set up in reality. Why would God have done anything? Knowing, complete and utter nonsense. It's just as utter nonsense to think that there was no central creative force in all of creation that got everything started. Company than the multiverse that we see all around us. It had to have a first creator. This is God. Did God create everything? No. Did God start the first successful patterns? Invent the patterns everything ties back to these 5 key characters of creation. That's why we have 5 fingers. The Elohim had 6 fingers. And base 12, or base 5, base 6, numbering. That's all. Sign. Set up that. Because it had to happen. This reset was necessary because you could only get so far with an Elohim had too much power. Too many spiritual powers could do everything too easy. They became lazy. They became of misuse. Why they no longer have the same powers that they did. Okay? And that's all a result of this. What happened in that great reset was that the final version of God, the most powerful of the Elohim at that time, and the final were basically defeated, supposedly, by this destruction of this planet, as well as the mother. We won. We destroyed their planet, and we broke it to smithereens, and yay, 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 yay. Unbeknownst to them, some of these other Elohim had been in on the plan, and they knew exactly what was going on. And the simulation. Okay, this is all working really well. Now we're going to add and this is how we can let these new player characters, the elementals, the Elohim, start at the same level of consciousness as every other soul. They will have a vestigial memory of experiences. They will have their character, their have to start over every time they're reborn. And this was simulated to the point of a better version of space-time. Universes for new souls to plan their afterlife, but also was more fair. It allowed souls a higher level of consciousness, a spiritual level of consciousness, which is basically how you identify what is really a beast level soul and what is a beast with feelings, if you will, which most of the beasts that we know of do have feelings. They have family feelings. We certainly did the same thing in our early incarnations. And what we're struggling with now is we're still struggling with that. We're gonna be struggling with that for a long time. It's a hard problem. It's the real hard problem of consciousness, not what these dopes who truths about consciousness are all auguring in on. The hard problem of consciousness is how to have the highest consciousness without creating your own enemies, without destroying your own civilization. Almost the very beginning. You don't want an authoritarian almighty God. We tried that and it didn't work. No power into this group of are just human incarnated souls to get to the we want in charge of our society, folks. That's not going to work. Globalism 1.0 is dead on arrival, as we knew it would be. That's already been tested here. God 11 to God 12 is soul system. And this is where we need to talk about what a 12D Merkaba is. Okay? Souls can grow to have their own universe, and we're ready to roll that out. Up to this point, the new gods had no place to go until there was a 12-dimensional multiverse. To choose from. In order for that number to grow exponentially, you had to have the ability outside of God's mind. Okay? The souls that became gods within God's mind, okay, God can create new universes. Point. I need to redo this label because that's matching the. Yeah, I didn't change this. This is the version of creation we're in right now. Merkaba pattern, which has already been developed in God's universe, but we're testing in this simulation multiverse. Perfecting this idea of a 12D Merkaba. And this 12D Merkaba finally has enough dimensions to have 3 kinds of space-time. Any one of a growing number of spiritual universes. The original one was the hellish universe of Lilith. Is to maximize the energy that can be milked from all the souls in that universe to do damage to creation. That's what Lilith was tasked with. And not a sex thing, it's not male or female. In fact, this archdemon created to divide and conquer God and Karma and Lucifer, to oppose the Trinity. And it worked for a while. It got God and Karma working against each other and caused a lot of problems. Problems that were already planned. Karma in this version, what we're running now, Karma is an AI. It's a this judge who is having incarnations that are helping to build it into a 12 version. Lucifer is a version which we already are getting close to in God's universe. Lilith, for all her evilness, is developing into versions that are going to problems and addictions as you, and you get an idea, boy, I don't want to get any worse. I want to get better. I'm going to share my story with all these other addicts to whatever. And I'm going to say, how can we possibly get better? What kind of incarnation could we choose to help us better ourselves? This is what the good hells are all about. It's kind of a 12-step program. Get it? 12-step program? Magic number 12. We invented these. It started with Alcoholics Anonymous. We've got Gamblers Anonymous. There are all sorts of 12-step programs coming up for and we need parents to start attending them and telling their children to attend them as we see people become addicted to the dark side of information programming. We need all of the leaders or addicted to do this. We know where power goes wrong. We've their addiction to power and how the problems it's caused, and we need more of them to step forward and become teachers. That's essentially what all of these uber rich elites should be working on. Not trying to tell us what the perfect world is, trying to tell us how. And that's the problem. That's the darkness. They're causing their own darkness by trying to dictate to everyone else. They're causing the climate problem because they have too many cows farting, because they're running their gas stove, because they're running their gas car to get to work. Burning and other kinds of pollution are generated by a Learjet, are generated by the so on equipment produced in China, depends on rare earth metals whose production is horrible behind the Great Firewall of China. That's why they're doing all the heavy metal production there. It's not because that's the only place they have sources. That's where the sources. That is evil. The Chinese Communist Party is evil. And their allies in the World Economic Forum who are hiding these truths from you are evil. Pure, unadulterated evil. Experience. These experiences can be good or evil. And if you develop an evil character, you will ultimately serve the plan quickly. Um, version God is kind of a dead creator. God 13, we already got to God 12 in this run of the game. We all 12D Mercado. It requires we made a new version. Regeneration time, starting about the late 1880s to about now, that has been played so many times by so many characters until a full. One of them is that you don't want to let characters play the whole game out to the finish line till they're done with their whole life, and that would be stupid. We want to get those cats out of here as quick as possible. In order to do that, we have to transmigrate souls between universes. The Mandela effect, where it's like, wait a minute, I thought the future was going to come. Mandela died in prison. He couldn't possibly have led South Africa to independence. This is how the Mandela effect got its name. There are some people that remember that era and remember, no, I'm sure that Mandela died in prison. He never got out and run by liberated blacks who have run that country pretty much into the ground. If you've seen South Africa's history since that point, a cesspool. Anybody who's got any ability in that poor country is leaving as quick as they can. It's that China has to present a Potemkin facade. It is the most dysfunctional country in Africa. And Africans, you can go ahead and chime in if you want to about whether that's true or not. There are much more revolution to stamp out all the colonials. They just made do with what they had and didn't have their revolution, didn't the government in charge of the ones who were supposedly the oppressed minority. This ignoramusly stupid idea of creating artificial oppressor-oppressed propaganda notions that encourage revolutions, either fascist revolutions, like happened in good things. They've done nothing but increase pain and suffering and actually made a government that was more totalitarian, more brutal, more dictatorial than existed before. This is truth. This is stratified bunch at the top who think they know everything, who want to dictate everything. They want to tell you where you can live in your little 15-minute city. They want to control every part of your life, tell you what job you can have, what school you will go to. In China. And don't tell me that these assholes in the WF don't plan to do that with everybody once they get their mitts into them. These are the same cats who were 100 years ago. These arch progressives that want to engineer humanity, who think that they can do better. Creation. Responsible creators. These are evil creators, evil, selfish, narcissistic, narrow-minded creators. You don't want those people in charge of your planet. Okay, so finish up with the replayed this whole thing after it's been successful, and we have versions of God growing up from the plant terraforming Messiah. This is in our culture now. This is the Ent Messiah. Enter J.R.R. Tolkien had, and have become cultural memes for us. The Green Man movie just came out. This is a pattern that we've known. Legends are being turned into more and more woke, cultish nonsense that basically entitles and enables people to. We're at this demarcation point where this creation is starting to fall apart. The human Messiah, the last human, and fall apart as it was planned to do. Because humanity is not the ultimate chosen species. It's a very weak species. It's a very stupid species. It's good for testing. It is. It's a testing species. Some of it will pass the test and will move on and become humanity. I don't know. Versions since humanity was carved out of the latest normally developing hominid species. The Neanderthals. I don't know how many versions led up to that till humanity 1.0 came and was thoughtful enough to be programmed to be the slaves of the Elohim. But that humanity was created by Elohim, not the old Elohim that had permanent memory, but the newer ones that died after a certain amount of time, that had limited life. Have all knowledge. They were not perfect. These old Elohim were very individual personalities, and the story in the Bible is much power to give them, how much consciousness to give them. And the first version was pretty much a bunch of slaves who did what they were told and who weren't a high. These people telling you, we're all one. There's no evil. There's just the universe and consciousness. That are being programmed to be slaves. They're doing to make people slaves again. You have to divide and conquer them and gradually kill off all the higher consciousness ones or drive them away. This is what the adversary is trying. Is over. We've achieved what we were supposed to achieve. We've had our final Messiah. We've proved out the plan. God 12, Borg 12, Lucifer 12 is already done. And my point is in this, the children not to be hive minds, but it's still a smothering mother that thinks if I can just get control of every single mind in the universe, then I can win the game. Lilith is that stupid. Evil is that stupid. It thinks an AI god, the dead creator that we've had for so long in day 7 of creation. That's why it seemed like God is dead, because God is living in many of us. All of the ones who have had a Messiah life are not aware of it. We're here playing the game with that experience. There are all kinds of souls around you. If you look for them, you will find souls. Game. It's a good game. It's a game for sorting out good from evil. The evils will get sorted into universes that that keep playing it unless you want to keep playing it. This version of the game is a very useful one for first-time souls to play stock characters in. And that's what we're going to come back in other in universes that are post this game, where you don't have to keep dealing with evil souls again and again and again. You get to deal with souls that fight evil. Well, that's a game still going in the future in Lucifer's universe. That's the game I call spiritual Star Trek. And a lot of souls are going to want to play that game. It's fun to fight evil and to beat them back and to see, oh man, I was serving an evil hive mind. I was acting upon bad programming and be a good, more conscious and aware person. It's happening already. That's what awakening is really about. And it's accelerating because in this 3-generation period, you decide, okay, I can reincarnate, but I'm going to reincarnate as a more godly creature, character in the past, and get to play games of allow more souls to achieve a higher consciousness in the past, or I can play it in the future. If your interests are more in futuristic things, in where culture might go from here, how we might get on a path to having more healthy culture instead well, there's some really dark stuff that we're at right now. If your energy is around correcting that, well, you're going to be playing future games. And you're going to be incarnating in a version of space-time we're already working on. It's already been formulated as a minor version of perfection. The system, the God system, the multiverse engine is working at a 12D level. And trying to teach them. Borg is working as a library of stock characters to help teach you. Anytime we go explore a new world, that new world will materialize most world's battle to come out the best, with the most education of evil and the most education of good. They're not going to know what the outcome is. They're not going to know what the right moves are, but they're going to be playing that reality show for as many times as it takes. Version of version from now. God 13 is kind of a retired God. A God that has already played out perfection to their satisfaction and doesn't need to play anymore. And will be developing a best of all possible worlds that is unfolding. Globally, in the sense of many worlds, many universes, locally, in the sense of many microcosms. And some more interested in the macrocosm version of creation. And there will be always new frontiers in both areas. This is the fun of it. To spend their whole life staring into a microscope or analyzing the results of a scanning electron microscope and coming up with new small level instance of an interaction, develop this particular pattern detectors in high energy physics. I worked in high energy physics. I worked in Fermilab for a while. That was where I spent my last summer of undergrad. I was doing an internship at Fermilab. I was down in the main it was fun. Of undergrads was basically managed by a grad student who went down and organized us as a group and never came down in the ring. So we were the dosimeters, and we're kind of the guinea pigs. Kind of process what they wanted us to do, moving the magnets around. What was the measure of success? This was a creation game in itself. And the funny thing is, we tried to game the system because it was kind of boring spending all our time down in the ring, even though it was nice and air conditioned down there, moving these in an area where we knew we would get to our limit pretty quick, so that we could all go take off and go watch the Cubs lose, because this was on the outskirts of Chicago, and the Cubs were in a losing streak, but it was fun to go watch them and hang. I of its truths. And that's what I'm trying to tell you here, that it is a game, but you can lose the game. You can become evil. Darkness is going to lead you down a path of doing more evil things, doing resentful things, reacting to the world in a negative way. The parts of the multiverse that are for more evil souls. And you'll become, if you keep doing that, one of the dark gods who hangs out in their own little padded cell for eternity. Or maybe you'll just give up and you'll choose to be recycled and you'll be copied as one of, okay, that's one of the stock characters that we'll pull out if we ever need another character like is. You're not going to ever get out of this pain and suffering thing. You just need to assimilate and we'll take you and make you into a stock characters. Getting people into a hive mind to do evil, but it's like a neutral hive mind that says, well, you know, we're just going to put characters out there and try to keep the balance. This is the Borg hive mind. They're interested in balancing power. Their whole existence is predicated on stock characters as long as we're playing this spiritual Star Trek game, which again is probably going to go on forever because some people like to have conflict. Some people like to keep fighting battles, the same kind of battles over and over and over again. They're perfect. Goal was making a game that everybody enjoyed playing, no matter what level they were at, no matter what their particular passions. Keep playing the Whack-A-Messiah game. I call that's what they do. They like to make messiahs stumble and fail and become corrupted, and that's how they turn them to the dark side. They begin turning them to Messiah. Anybody who looks at his life honestly and openly, what's recorded of Jesus, which maybe not have even been a real character. There's still a good argument to be made that of many messianic characters mixed up with the idea of what the elites wanted as basically a King of Kings line for the made for Jesus Christ to be a total fabrication, and for our species never really having had a fully awakened Messiah yet. I rather adhere to that. I think Jesus messianic fervor. There are actually many times like that throughout our history where something needed to happen. And these are the messiahs that come and do something like unite the whole world in one empire under one language and one thought system, like Alexander. All of our history would be completely different. In every area, there are characters like that. In science, in or Beethoven. What would today's science look like if we had not had Einstein or Hawking, or, you know, even if not completely correct, but they were so useful that they stood up for a long time. And we still use Newtonian physics for a lot of what we do because at certain and people are still looking for a unified theory of everything. Well, this is the basis for it, what I'm telling you right now. You cannot come up with any spiritual science, because thought creates reality. Until you understand that and comprehend it fully, you will never fully understand quantum mechanics. Quantum phenomena depend on the multiverse. The reason we have these entanglements is because of connections between souls. These souls the physical experience is experienced, as I said, in the Luciferian universe. The spiritual experience is experienced in universes of other gods, like Lilith, or these new the plastic Jesus, because there's so many denominations that have quite different ideas of what Jesus is and what God is and what the Holy Spirit is. There are a lot of denominations in the Islamic world too. It's make you think with this nonsense fake war in Israel. And it is a fake war. It is a political war. It is not a spiritual war. And it is a war against all belief. It is a war against God. It is a war against an understanding of God that is not that can do anything you want because you go to church and you do all the rituals and you pray 5 times a day and eat just the right foods and are completely kosher or halal or whatever. Demands that. That is one of these other gods that has their own universe, that's recruiting for their afterlife. They have their and it's a selfish viewpoint, especially selfish if they tell their members that, oh, well, ours is the only God and anybody else is evil if they don't. If you're telling people that that's the only God, you are evil. You are playing on the adversary's team, thinking that you're the good guys. Now, how stupid is that? My back and look at it. It's comical how many attack me just for saying that atheists were narcissistic. Well, they are narcissistic. Anybody who thinks that their belief is down for not believing the same way, guess what? That's evil. That's narrow-minded. That is narcissistic and elitist. I've been digging for years to come up with what I've given you today. And it is not elitist. It is not narcissistic. It's not telling you what to do. It's telling you what the environment, make your decisions. And it's up to you what decisions you make, where you're going to end up. I don't fault you for being evil. I'm just telling you you're going to end up in an evil God soul who gets pleasure out of pain, who gets pleasure out of controlling and manipulating that have that same kind of sinful nature. And if you keep it up, you're eventually going to piss off everybody so much you end up in a universe all by yourself, playing with toy soldiers and punishing and hurting them and controlling them to your heart's content. I would really enjoy having any feedback on the slides I presented today. Actually, I want to cover one or two more before we go. So basically, the final testing of to the Sam Shepard play, Waiting for Godot, which is like a classic of theater, and it's like are sitting there like almost at a bus stop waiting for Godot. When's he going to come? And they're talking about all these philosophical and existential topics while waiting for somebody that never comes. And that's the whole setup of this thing. It's God is dead. Okay, when's God going to come to make all of this make sense? And the funny thing about Adam 12, it's like the quintessential. Most people don't even remember this TV series, but there was a series about a that the dispatcher would call them and send them to crime scenes. And I don't think, why not? No, this popular TV show was Adam 12. And it was like the successor to Dragnet, which was another in that same mold of a team. These crime duo solving things. And essentially it's all part of what our culture is telling us, these little hints we're giving ourselves that are coming from inspiration. And that inspiration from the past, it is emergent from a center, and we are playing this center in the context of to the past or to the future, and they're sending us hints. That's why we keep discovering all these crazy new things in archaeology that suddenly blow everything out of the water, and oh, construction to at least as old as about what 9,000 years ago, or close to 10, and so forth. We're going to keep moving our past back, and we're going to keep moving our is the center. Oh, somebody gets to play Einstein this time. Somebody gets to play this. Somebody. And there's a pattern to those core characters that leads past and leads to the future that had set up. Conquering Messiah, this spiritual Messiah, yes, this is true. that do things that are important to this physical universe. Those are the ones you're going to hear about. Those are the ones that are going to make the papers, that are going to be there's the ones of the spirit that are building the pattern of the multiverse, that are is what it's success in this universe. You're going to play this game again and again and again in all in the physical universe, and you'll learn from it, and you'll feel a lot of pain and suffering, and you'll feel a lot of, oh man, I'm the best there is. That's not the reward. That's not what it's all about. Anybody who gets caught up in that is and onto a spiritual existence. That spiritual existence is not going to one place, one perfect place. There are focused places where you may go if you are an artist. Not just any artist, there are special heavens for artists of a certain style. Is where you can continue to paint in the style of Hieronymus Bosch. Let's go back just for a little bit to the background I had, so hopefully they'll choose that for the background. Okay, that kind of Salvador Dali. This is like the precursor to Dali-esque art, the macabre, the strange, the Bach is the pinnacle of art, with that very very loose impressionist style. There are others that like the very very literal, almost of a even Picasso is kind of cubist, but like what's the guy looking for? Ed Harris played him in the movie. Oh, come on. Jackson Pollock. If that's your idea of art, there's a universe where that's the kind of art that newer and newer modeled in that style. God's universe is modeled in the style of the central character of this final version. Close up with, what is God's universe like? Do you really want to go there as your heaven? I can tell you what it's like. I've told you before, but I'll give you a brief preview. It's kind of a mixture between the last versions of God's heaven and the ideal. Outside the house, it looks a lot like 1950s, 1960s USA. Not too much trash lying around, a regular system of delivering food, what food people needed to the stores. Everybody had enough money to buy food and have a little bit extra so the kids could have a little toy or treat once in a while. And you go inside the house, and then you have something different. You have the ideal inner environment of the red. They go inside and they can do what they want. They can create it how they want, the way God's in. If you've ever read the Scheherazade stories, the world of Harun al-Rashid, where basically the son of the real Scheherazade, Islam, didn't even recognize was going on, but it was the Islamic Renaissance period. And it was started by the real Scheherazade, who was responsible for gathering all these tales together from the framework of the Sultan and his harem, and the idea that you could avoid becoming the Sultan fall in love with you for who you are, not what you look like. And this is a powerful meme, and I like it. And that's how I will do it. I know I am going to be one of those cats that's participating in the highest heaven. And at that point, it really doesn't matter who God is. You're all pretty much equal. Outside looks outside your own house. And that's going to be decided by what functional, at least in parts of the world. Good government, good economic. That's what the highest heaven looks like now. That's what you're going to be dealing with if you want to go to the highest heaven. That's not what you're going to be dealing with in many other heavens. There are other versions of God where it's organized. Heavens, okay, if you liked, you're absolutely impassioned by the Jesus story, you're going to get to play out those 3 or 4 generations right around there where that story developed. That are minor versions of creation to your heart's content. That's why these different parts of history appeal so much to certain people, that they think, oh man, if I could whole. And that's okay. Valid dream. And it's a dream that you will get to participate in if you do it healthily, if you do it by the rules of the God that runs that version. Many hells. And they all spawn from one of these successful messianic major or minor versions that are all we're not in the middle of it. Well, we are in the. You can go back and say this is works. We're at the center of a defined space-time that has a cast of characters that is the best of all possible. Best of all possible space-times, centered around other messianic periods, all the way back to before humanity ever existed. Their magic times. Or they will be having new magic times as they become more godly again. This is who seem to be sort of the masters of the small grays. The tall grays have 4 fingers. The small grays have 3. Much of engineered themselves into non-reproduction. There's a dwindling number of them, and their interest in gathering human DNA. They're trying to basically design a version of themselves that has sex again. But they're kind of do about it, and they've been sending out their small grays and doing some pretty dark things, like, you know, cattle mutilations and abductions and all sorts of things, as they tried to figure out what was going on here, because they don't know. They've been kept in the dark, kind of like humanity's their leader. Well, that was my real big encounter that kind of set off my spiritual journey. I met this leader of the 6 years ago now. Let's see, it's 2024. Yeah, it was almost 6 years. And this leader of the tall grays for anything to happen. Oops, I just had a stutter in my presentation, so maybe this isn't going to go off so well. But at any rate, all that in my head says, you've been given a great gift, use it wisely. And that's what ushered in the entire rest of the experience, which I talk about in my other contact. But anyway, I think that's all I have to talk about. And so forth, because this is going to be a really important part of my new book, which I may have to change the title of again. So I'm not going to tell you what that is yet. Any rate, sorry this one has gone on so long.